It's our termly Ask Me Anything. We do this periodically. I didn't mention this earlier, but Dave and I need to be a little separate for acoustic reasons. We're still getting on. It's okay. People have been writing questions and dropping them in the basket or emailing them to us, and we'll do our best to answer them. Some of these we had in advance and have thought about. If you've got any on the spot, throw them into the mix and we'll see what we think. But here we go. Have you got your list, Dave?
Yes,
What's first?
So the first one is, what is confirmation all about? When can it happen? What are the ages for baptism, admission to communion, etc. in the Church of England?
Oh, that's interesting, because we've got baptism today, and we've got confirmation next week.
It's very timely, the question.
It is, and we can't confirm Maver next week. So that's there's an age limit, clearly, between where Maver is and where people who are getting confirmed next week. So it's good to work this all out. Some of this varies by church. Some of this varies from church to church. Some of this is just national policy. So you can be baptised at any age in the Church of England. If you've been born, you can be baptised. That's what we think. And people in their 80s are baptised. And Maver, how old is Maver? Is she one-ish? 18 months? So she can be baptised. And there are churches that don't think that. And I'm not sure, I think that's fine. I know Baptists, if you want to wait till you're grown up and own it for yourself, not a problem. But we think Maver's in the family of God. So we're going to baptise her, but she can't make the promises yet because we had to make those for her and she's little. So confirmation is this opportunity that the Church of England has done to say, when you are ready to own this and say, I want to own my promises for myself, we confirm you. It's going to happen next week. If you want to see what that's like, come along. The other thing that will happen then is that the bishop comes along. If you get baptised, it's just the vicar, entry-level clergy, stage one. Next week, the bishop will be here, and he's going to lay his hands on people's heads and pray for them to be filled with the Holy Spirit, and that the Holy Spirit confirm their faith, which is a lovely thing. You won't find that anywhere in the Bible, but I love it, because our bishops were made bishops by other bishops before them, who were made bishops before them, and that line goes all the way back to St. Peter, who was Bishop of Rome. So there's this connection that happens, that you have your hands laid on you and prayed for by someone who was laid on and prayed for by bishops, by bishops, by bishops, by bishops. So it includes us all. If ever you've been confirmed into the Church of England, or into the Catholic Church, or I believe into the Orthodox Church, we have these unbroken lines of bishops. And that's just beautiful. It's a lovely picture. And I tell the story about confirmation that I probably don't have time to repeat at length here, but of someone being confirmed because, the army padre said, yeah, sure, I'll get confirmed. And yet, even though they didn't really believe anything they were saying, years later, these people were becoming priests. It was odd. Something happens. When we say these words, Jesus appears and really does something, and it is beyond description or knowledge. So confirmation happens, and in this diocese you have to be at least 10, and I think very nearly 11. Some people are getting confirmed at this age because they're thinking, actually, I want to join the Church of England. This is a mark of thinking, this is my church, this particular one, that's where I want to be in. So confirmation could mean lots of different things. We in this diocese do this other thing called admission to communion, where if you're not old enough to be confirmed yet, but you still think, I want communion, it's not fair, I like the family meal. We all have bread and wine, and that's for people who are in the church family. Why aren't I allowed that? So in this church, we're one of those churches in this diocese that said from the age of 7, if you've done a bit of preparation and thinking about it, and a short course that Brenda and I run, that Brenda put together, that is brilliant, you can then start receiving communion from the age of 7. So it's restricted there. Unless, here's the thing, I can't excommunicate anybody. That's a big deal. So if you've already started having communion anywhere else and you've been properly admitted, you can have communion here. If you normally have communion in your church and you're a Baptist or a Roman Catholic or an Orthodox person and you want communion here, you're allowed. I can't stop anyone from having it if someone has duly admitted them to communion. I think that's it. Has anybody got any other questions about all of that while we're on the topic of how baptism, confirmation, etc. works, having just done all that? It's a good question. Have I missed it?
Just what people are thinking, can I just add a comment?
Yeah.
The thing I quite like about confirmation is that it feels like it's closing the loop that we've opened today with Maver. So, a deposit into Maver's life, as you said. and then she gets to kind of confirm that for herself and say it's my faith when she's ready. I got baptised and confirmed in my 30s, came in from a different church tradition, hadn't done any of that kind of thing, so did that all in one go. And the other thing I like about confirmation, just in answer to this question, is that there comes a point of decision. I think some people talk about journeying with faith or like learning as you go, but it's good to have at some point to make a decision. Yes, this is what I believe. I do believe in Jesus. Yeah, he does help me every day. And those kind of things. And I think confirmation creates a focus for that, where you've got to own it for yourself and say, yeah, okay, this is my faith. Like we've said in the readings just now.
Yeah. And
so
you could read
that loop of faith.
And people have that moment years after they've had that realization sometimes. There's some of the people getting confirmed next week are in their 40s and 50s. I won't say which ones are which. But and someone in their 80s who thought, I don't know why I never got around to getting confirmed. I missed the boat, I'd like to be confirmed. Yeah. You can be 85 and realise, I do want to own this. Yeah. I've actually owned this for years. Yeah. It's lovely.
Next question?
Next question.
Okay, next question is, if God made everything, how can evil exist? If God made everything, how can evil exist?
Over to you. I will answer this. I will answer this, and I'm sure Dave has some thoughts as well. But I like to start. I reject the idea that the vicar has all the answers and all the knowledge. I do have many of them, but you also have thoughts and knowledge. So if God made everything, God is good, evil exists, what's going on with that? That's the question. Susan, any thoughts? And then Max.
Evil started with Adam and Eve, where Satan tempted them in the Garden of Eden. And that was the start of the fall of man. So you've got choices whether you're going to be good or whether you're going to be bad.
Okay, good thought.
Well, I think evil starts with our free will, and it's because we have the option to do good or evil, and what we do in this life proves to God who we are and whether we deserve his kingdom or not. He gives up kind of a bit of his power so that we can have free will, so we truly have the choice in what we do before we're judged.
I like that. There's something interesting in that. I like what you said, Max, about God giving up some of his power. I like this idea. People talk about the big word. You ready? They say, don't let your Greek show in a sermon, but it's a kenotic thing, the self-emptying of God. If God didn't allow any of those choices, nothing could happen, right? That God voluntarily created space where we could choose things, and if it's a real choice, then you have to be able to choose the bad thing, the wrong thing. So it's inevitably part of our choice. I don't know what I think about the Adam and Eve story, if I'm honest, Susan. I know I'm going to leave you with even more questions from me. Do we think Adam and Eve were real people? Over to you. I'm not sure it even matters, but it does. That story tells us something about people being tempted and making a choice. And I think that's largely where evil comes from, is God seems to have to allow it. It's one of those bits, I have to trust that God knows what he's doing. If he doesn't, he's not the God that we think he is. Yes, sir. What's your name? Paddy.
Can he make a stone that he can't lift?
Can God make a stone that God can't lift? Okay, I like that one. If God can do all things, then he can make a stone that God can't lift. That's the paradox, isn't it? I don't know. Yes, and then he could unmake it. I don't. Anybody else got any thoughts? I wrestle with this, and this comes up in sermon and sermon and sermon time and time and again, and we just have to sort of trust, and that's not a good answer, and we'll keep wrestling. Dave, have you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I think that word choice is really important, actually. So I think a couple of things from the story in Genesis that Sue mentioned and you've talked about. One is that God made the world, and that, that's what the Bible teaches, and throughout at the end of every day, God looked and said it was good. And when he made us, he said, it's very good. So there's something additional about the creation of people that took the word from good to very good. And then it's the paradox of then God gave us choices. He didn't make us robots. He gave us choices, and we chose both good. We also chose evil. And that seems to be, like theologically, where kind of evil seemed to come into the world. There was a choice there from a creation of a good world that somehow went slightly wrong. And so, like I work for the government. Don't throw things at me, please. But it's really interesting listening to people, because obviously I hear things through a different lens, and there's a lot that the government should do and the government should fix. And in a sense, I hear that there's a lot that God should do and God should fix. And that is true. And God should do things and the government should be doing things. There's also a sense in which we should be doing things, and that we're actually more powerful than we think we are, and have more influence than we might realize we have, and can impact more people than we think we might, for good or ill. And it's that classic quote from films that I think about when I hear questions like this, which is, all it takes for evil to triumph is for good men and women to do nothing. Mm-hmm. And so I think this question comes with, yes, it's like, what is God playing at? And that's good to wrestle with that, like kind of Rob's opened that question. It's also like, what are we playing at? And what can we do? I think the question comes at both levels.
Yeah. No, that's a good point.
We're at the party we were at last night. The guy whose party it was, he's the kind of guy who drives people to better themselves. And that makes him popular and unpopular with different kinds of people. And it was interesting to just look around the party and just see people who've been helped and moved on hugely from homelessness, addiction, and all sorts of kind of situations. And even just to have been okay to start with, met this guy, but then they've gone on to the next level. And that's just one life and the impact that one life has had. It really challenged me.
I think I want to relate this to our last question. I asked the confirmation candidates if they'd got questions, because they've spent 6 weeks thinking about this stuff. And one of them was, like, if you could ask God a question, and somebody said, how do you hear all our prayers at the same time? God, right? Which reminded me of Bruce Almighty, which I think is one of the better theological expositions of what it would be like to be God, if God were Morgan Freeman. I mean, you see all those emails coming in, or all the post-its coming in, and Bruce says to God, how do you handle the whole world? He's like, no, Bruce, that's just this block. Like, there's a lot. And it reminded me, this was my answer to that, that's overwhelming to me. And I realised, actually, I basically think of God as like a human, but better. Right? He's just like us, but smarter, better at listening, can do a few more things, better at multitasking, basically like us, but even better. And, well, actually, that wouldn't work. There isn't anyone who could be good enough to listen to all of the prayers in the world. And it reminds me that God is God and we are not. And whenever we try and think, oh, I think I understand how God does that we're dead wrong. And that's fine. And that's who we should worship, that God is beyond our wildest dreams. And I think that's related to the good and evil stuff, that when I get stuck with that, I can trust that I shouldn't understand. I should understand a bit, and you can understand more, and you can read books. And if you're really stuck on this, come see me, and I'll recommend a few things. But it's good that we don't understand God. If we did, he wouldn't be God. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We've got one last question, and then we'll wrap this up and move towards communion. What was the last question?
Which one would you like to go with? We've got... There are these two here.
Okay, what have we got here?
Two late entries. This one's about Holy Communion, that one's about bereavement.
I think I'm going to wrap this into a sermon shortly. So, yeah, what does that say?
Keep that one. This one is, how do you feel after receiving communion?
It's a good question. I think we'd all... How do you feel after receiving communion?
It depends what state of mind I'm in when I go up to receive it, if I'm being honest. So I think there's something about preparing to receive communion, because so it's just like Jesus said, do this in remembrance of me. So it's not like, in a sense, it's not for us. First off, it's to remember him. Why do we remember him? We're remembering his sacrifice for us. So it's remembering an expression of love. And so communion is an act of remembering an expression of love and a pattern that Jesus set for us to follow. So it's kind of just preparing. Okay, so it's basically it's like kind of putting down the stuff from the week and just for a minute and going, okay, I'm just going to park that and come back to it in a minute. And then coming with an open heart and an open mind to God. And actually a thankful heart, because I'm thankful for what he did for me. I'm incredibly thankful. And then... when I turn and leave, I'm that much better equipped because of that interaction of thankfulness with God to kind of deal with the stuff of the week.
And you feel that more and less.
Closer to God, yeah. If I take the stuff up to the communion rail or whoever's giving communion, then obviously I'm kind of coming with a barrier and baggage, and it's going to, it clouds and confuses. And that does happen. But if I can just kind of put it down to one side and just focus and concentrate, then it makes it so much a better interaction with God. Yeah.
How do you feel after? I will tell you, I do commit to answering the questions that you ask, but how do you feel after communion? Does anybody want to share? A lot? A little? Anything special? How do we feel after communion? Kim?
I feel uplifted after communion because it is a similar thing. So it's you walk in one state of mind and walk out in another state of mind. So it's just that feeling of happiness, joy, uplifting.
Okay. Uplifted. Okay. How do you feel? Victoria?
I'm a bit humbled and a bit more perspective when I kind of think back to the grand scheme of what Jesus has done for the world.
Like it's reorienting, isn't it? Points you back to that, gives you perspective. Anything else? How do we feel after communion? Val?
I always think it's a privilege to take communion because it reminds me of what Jesus did for me.
It is a privilege. I know taking communion was one of the things that convinced me I was an Anglican when I was worshipping in what turned out to be a Baptist church. And the way that we do it I like the seriousness with which we approach it. I like the chalice. And we often kneel at the top. Sometimes we stand here, sometimes we kneel down. Something about taking it very seriously and saying the same words every time, and that ritual and the connection with other churches, and thinking that Anglicans have said this same stuff. Catholics too. There's a lot of overlapping language. I feel at home when I take communion. If one of the other things that I've seen people really experience communion doing is giving communion. It's astonishing. The first time you give someone communion after you've been ordained, I don't know anybody who didn't cry doing that. Or if you're one of the people who gives that communion here and shares the chalice with people, it's just an incredible privilege. If you'd like to be part of the team that does that, do come and have a word with us, and we'll do something about that. But I feel different things sharing it than receiving it. I would disagree. No, I'm not going to disagree with you. You feel how you feel. It does depend on how I have approached it, but not entirely. There are times that I forgot to do all of that putting down stuff, and then when I hit my knees and the bread is there,
It's still transcendent.
Sometimes God puts my stuff down for me. And the physical act of doing the stuff I find a really helpful thing.
Yeah, that's good. No, that's good.
We're going to do communion next. So if you don't know how you feel after communion, pay attention, ask yourself questions, notice. And if you'd like to ask us any more questions, do so. And the ones that we didn't get to, we'll do next time. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you so much, Rob.
That was great.
Thanks for the questions.